Choice, your creative superpower. We have the power to manifest as we dedicate attention to our thoughts, but often miss opportunity to achieve the greatest good. Your superpower is waiting to be unleashed to unlock a fuller, more rewarding world for all. Join us every Thursday at noon Mountain Time for Choice, your creative superpower with Zoe Muro. And now, here's Zoe.
Folks, and welcome to the New Thought Media Network. Excuse me. My name is Zoe Muro, and I'm delighted to be your host once again for Choice, Your Creative Superpower. We're here each Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 12 noon Mountain Time. And what we do here is we consider how you can use your superpower to co-create your life experience for the greatest good. If you're coming back, it's good to spend some time with you once again. Now, if this is your first time, welcome. I'm a religious science practitioner at the Oakland Center for Spiritual Living in Northern California, and I'm also a transformational coach. I work with people who are looking to live their lives to the fullest. In today's episode, episode 23, we'll be looking at choice and boundaries. I'm going to start things off with a quote this week. This is from Cheryl Richardson. If you want to live an authentic, meaningful life, you need to master the art of disappointing and upsetting others, hurting feelings, and living with the reality that some people just won't like you. That's it. We're done here. Remember that. All your choices around boundaries are going to fall in line. Well, okay, maybe not. Maybe we need to actually do a little bit of work here. Okay, we'll see what we got. Hey, Wayne, good to see you. Always good to see you. So let's see. I want to take this down for a second. There we go. And once again, let's start. So when you think of a boundary, do you think of a barrier? Do you think of safety? Do you see boundaries as a way of keeping people away? If your experience of boundaries is focused primarily on distancing in some way, I've got great news for you. Boundaries do much more. They can actually bring you closer to people than you might have imagined, and still provide an element of safety and structure. Now, there are many types of boundaries that we can define, such as physical, which relates to our bodies, of course, mental, relating to our attitudes, emotional, financial, moral, sexual, and even spiritual or religious. Boundaries are perspectives. They're agreements, concepts. They only have meaning when they are known and understood. And they're only effective when they're observed or honored. For our purposes, we'll be talking about the boundaries that we set, not those that are implied or stated by laws or other requirements that we have no choice but to obey. Okay? So we're talking what's voluntary here, not what's dictated. Excuse me. We all have boundaries of one sort or another. And most of us, if not all of us, have either had someone run afoul of our own boundaries or we've run afoul of theirs. Our reactions can vary. Oh, yeah, they can vary from mild annoyance to absolute outrage. One thing that is absolutely true of every boundary that we set, honor, or violate is choice. That is to say, we chose to honor or violate a boundary or to set it in the first place. Boundaries are basically about behavior, what we consider to be acceptable behavior or what we consider to be unacceptable behavior. We will at times willingly, consciously forego setting boundaries. For example, let's say you're training to be a Navy SEAL. Well, you would be subject to physical abuse that would be completely unacceptable in most situations. But to be able to withstand the rigors of a Navy SEAL's service, this training is key to survival. That's okay, that's an admittedly extreme example, but it is a valid one all the same. Oh, hey, I see Fiona's joined us. Hi, Fiona. Hope you're having a good day. Okay, so more often than not, when people choose not to set boundaries, it's not because of some unusual circumstance like Navy SEAL training. I don't think there's too many of us who have done that. But most often, the reason that people choose not to set boundaries is determined by how they view themselves. It's based on their own identity, their lack of self-esteem, or their higher level of self-esteem, their success or lack thereof in setting boundaries. We have to look at what is going on in our life now. We have to look at what has gone on in our life before relative to boundaries. Have we had poor experiences in setting boundaries, for example? Under those circumstances, it's not uncommon for people to be unaware they actually had the opportunity to make a choice in the first place, or to downplay the opportunity. You'll hear things like, what I mean by downplaying the opportunity is, well, when you hear somebody say something like, well, it's okay, it really wasn't that important to me, or it's really not my place to say anything, or why bother? Is it really going to make a difference? Those are examples of people voluntarily allowing their boundaries to be violated, even if they were not aware that they were making a choice at that particular point in time. Those are all examples of choices being made. Boundaries are personal. You create them, you own them. And like anything that is truly personal, they might not be obvious to another person. They might not make sense to another person. And they might very well conflict with another person. All of that leads to a series of choices. Since you're creating your own boundaries, you get to choose what those boundaries are based on. The boundaries that are put in place to hold people off are often based on a fear mindset, while the boundaries that are put in place to enable connection and harmony, those are often based on a growth mindset. Here's an example. This is an all too real example. There are people who hesitate to define or uphold boundaries for themselves because they're afraid people will think they're too pushy, or they're too sensitive, or they're unlikable. You know what? They might be right. There might very well be people who view their boundaries and view them in that way. But, and this is a big but, so what? I don't mean to be flippant, but consider that if the boundary that was set is something that is truly tied to your beliefs, to your values, to your perspectives in life, and you've done your own work to ensure that you're setting boundaries based on your beliefs, based on values or perspectives that you truly hold to be integral to your life, well, why wouldn't you uphold them? Why shouldn't you uphold them? When I did the show about choice and identity, I don't remember which one that was. I spoke about all the different aspects of how we can choose to identify ourselves. And our boundaries are actually a representation of our identity, of ourself. Excuse me for a moment. So our boundaries are a representation of who we are. So to set boundaries that can be a benefit to your life, not a hindrance, there are a number of choices that we can consider. Okay, first of all, boundaries are actually never set in a vacuum. As we've discussed, they have a foundation in our perspectives, in our beliefs, our experiences, our very identity. And we create them to meet a specific purpose. Examine a boundary that you're setting, or you have set, or have chosen not to set for that matter, and ask yourself what purpose it served or was meant to serve. Often, you'll find that a boundary is based on a limit. You know, I can accept this much of whatever it might be, but no more than that. I'm willing to do this much, but no more. I'm willing to do or accept something for this long, but no longer. Know your limits. Understand your limits. Understand where they came from, why that particular limit makes sense to you, and choose where the boundary lies. Choose when, where, and for whom a boundary applies. Okay. Boundaries can be quite dynamic, and they can be very much circumstance or condition oriented. So what's acceptable at work might not fly very well at home, and vice versa. What's acceptable for your sibling may be completely unacceptable for a friend, just as what's acceptable for a friend could be inappropriate for a new acquaintance. Sometimes we set boundaries that aren't about ourselves at all, but they're about others. Now, I'm not talking about if my brother calls me one more time at midnight, I'm going to let him have it. Now, I'm thinking about boundaries we set, like, for example, for our children. We establish a bedtime. We set limits on TV or gaming, things of that nature. When my son and daughter were kids, we usually referred to these as rules, but they were designed not to specifically enforce a given behavior, but they were actually there to help them develop a sense of balance and responsibility. Yeah, okay. Sometimes boundaries and rules actually do kind of feel the same. I will acquiesce on that point. probably because I know my daughter is going to listen to this and she's going to say, wait a minute, we had rules. Those were rules. Those are the house rules. Nevertheless, boundaries for children are essential to their well-being and maturity, provided that they are based on reasonable expectations and core values. Let's face it, because I said so, in and of itself, is not really a reason. Now, having said all these wonderful things about boundaries, there are downsides. Not going to deny it. Sometimes the boundaries you set simply will not sit well with other people. Does that make them bad boundaries? Not necessarily, but they could be. Right? During the height of the very early stages of the pandemic, some people set absolutely outrageous boundaries regarding what they consider to be their safe personal space. Right? Recall, we're talking about 3 feet of social distance and 6 feet of social distance and such. Well, I was loudly and angrily berated one time by this guy. I was walking down the street, passed him on the sidewalk. We approached from different directions. And he contended that I should have crossed the street to allow him to pass so that I wasn't sharing the width of the sidewalk with him. And I mean, he was absolutely furious that I would even walk on that same side of the street. If I remember correctly, I did actually step out into the street, if only to avoid what was truly an unnecessary argument. As annoyed as I was, I mean, I was being berated really loudly for apparently violating this guy's boundary. I did have to consider that he had a real concern. And I don't know what underlying conditions or circumstances are operating in his life at that particular point in time. For all I know, he could have been incredibly ill, or he could have someone at home that was very susceptible to illness. And for him to be out and about felt dangerous to him. So we never quite know how someone sets a boundary or why they've set it. The phrase live and let live comes to mind right now. Is that a boundary in and of itself? Is that a boundary tester? Is it a boundary killer? I mentioned balance earlier, and the idea of balance really comes to the forefront when I'm choosing when, where, and how to express and uphold my boundaries. I consider myself to be a very private person and something of an introvert. Actually, there's a term that I love called ambivert, which is that I'm introverted under most circumstances, but as necessary, I can be extroverted. Well, regardless of whether you think of me as an ambivert or an introvert, I know that I am very open about many aspects of my life at many times. If you've listened to a number of my talks, you know that I choose to speak very openly and freely about the abuse that I experienced in my childhood. I speak openly and freely about my recovery from addiction, about family estrangement, and so many other things. But that doesn't mean that my every thought, feeling, and life experience are for public consumption. So I find a balance in what I am willing to bring forward and what I believe is too personal. Okay, my boundaries. Let's consider an important distinction regarding boundaries. A boundary is not a demand. We might prefer that everyone respect our boundaries at all times. But while we can choose what we see as important, we can't enforce compliance. Okay. And this is important because, in a sense, all boundaries are relationship oriented. Whether we're talking about our relationship with ourselves or another person or an organization. And as soon as we step outside of ourselves, we have to consider that each of us has the same right to choose. Each of us has the same right to define boundaries. Sometimes the best choice is actually a compromise. Fiona says, sharing your boundaries can create new boundaries. So an evolutionary process of honesty and love in itself. Absolutely. Absolutely. As people get to know your boundaries, it allows them to really get a sense of what is important to them as well. Anytime that a boundary is violated, there's a loaded word, isn't it? Maybe I should have said ignored or forsaken. But, sometimes it really does feel like a violation. But in any event, anytime that it is forsaken, violated, ignored, we have a choice to make. Do we ignore that? Do we discuss it? Do we challenge it? Do we withdraw the boundary entirely? Do we assume it'll be ignored again? The assumption is probably not the best one. You might be surprised to find out that the so-called boundary jumper was completely unaware of the boundary or misinterpreted it. So, as personal as boundaries are, they might be unknown to others. Okay? And likewise, challenging might be working the same assumptions. The challenger might be working off the same assumptions. And there's really a good point in that interaction, in that butting of heads, because it allows you to discuss. It allows you to share. It allows you to go through what Fiona is describing as this evolutionary process of honesty and love. Okay. So you might actually wind up in a far better place than you had been. It's really important that you bear in mind that there is only one person that you are truly in control of. Okay? And that person is the person you see in the mirror. Now, I actually recommend against simply ignoring it if a boundary is violated. Now, there are certainly times that you might, and there are reasons why you might. But the reason I would suggest that is not your automatic response is that can really be a path to resentment. And continually treading that path can lead to anger aimed at the other person or even yourself. And if that continues unabated, it can set up a predisposition for distrust, and it can even inhibit or prevent connection. Eckhart Tolle said, rather than being your thoughts and emotions, be the awareness behind them. So use your awareness of your own values, your own beliefs, your own perspectives, and then validate them against any new experiences or knowledge to see if they still hold true for you. Use your awareness of the importance of the boundaries you set to choose whether you can safely, reasonably allow them to bend or even be pushed aside. Use your awareness of your relationships and the people to whom you relate to choose when it is appropriate to divulge your boundaries and when it's right to invite someone to work with you in establishing boundaries. Because as personal as a boundary might be, so too can a relationship be personal. And there are times and reasons when boundaries most certainly should be chosen together. Speaking of other people, there are choices to be made regarding their boundaries. First and foremost, do you choose to honor their boundaries? Do you choose to give others the same right and authority to create and enforce boundaries as you would want for your own? If you find yourself saying at any time, no, why not? I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying I would question it. I'd want to know more. Speaking of others, there are others that are groups, right? We have group boundaries as well as personal boundaries. Sometimes what I'm referring to as a group boundary, you might think of as being what's customary or the culture of a group or a community. Other times it's linked directly to the purpose of the group or the type of group it is. So basically, to be seen as a member of that group, it's often expected you'll abide by the boundaries of that group. Choose your groups with awareness, just as you would choose a relationship with any other person with awareness. Now, we speak each week about how choice and the topic of the week are related. And to be sure, boundaries are a very important part of choice. We've been discussing basically how you choose to set boundaries. So let's turn it around and look at ways that boundaries actually help you make choices. So we'll start off with those yellow flags that pop up in life, those persistent nagging feelings that something's just not right. Well, that's likely pointing you to your own internal boundaries, your own moral compass, if you will, and choosing to ignore them, those yellow flags and sometimes red flags, well, that can be challenging at the very least. In general, the boundaries that you have set can and very likely do serve an important part in making choices. Here's an example. You're looking at buying a car, and the dealer says, I've got an offer for you. This is a great offer, but you have to take it right now or it's off the table. Now, you might have a boundary that you have set based on your experiences that encourages you to avoid making split-second decisions and to think things through. Your awareness of that boundary can help you determine whether you have enough information at the moment to make a decision that's economically sound. And whatever else needs to be taken into consideration at that time, right? Whatever would make that a reasonable decision rather than a rash decision. Here's another one. Your brother, who's notoriously late for pretty much everything, tells you he'll be late for the big family dinner. So why don't you pick up the items that he was supposed to bring? Now, having been through this far too many times, you might bring to mind a boundary that says, well, hey, honor your obligations. And perhaps another one that says, please respect my time and my energy. So these are boundaries that you have for yourself, and these boundaries inform your choice. And you very politely but firmly decline your brother's invitation to do his work for him. And probably make a mental note that then for the next family dinner, nothing gets assigned to your brother that you would miss having. Yeah, we'll let him bring the napkins. And your boundaries might very well propel you into action rather than stopping you from doing something. If you cannot accept social injustice and you come across a situation when someone is clearly being treated unjustly, your boundary may inform you to interject yourself into the situation in an attempt to resolve it or de-escalate it. Now, assuming that it's safe for you to do so, or if not, to address it in some other way. In essence, your boundaries are the practical application of your values. And with that, I'd like to wrap up this episode. I would love to hear what you think about choice and boundaries. So please, by all means, feel free to email me at zodemuro@gmail.com. All right. I always want to hear your idea about the topic at hand or any ideas that you have for future topics regarding choice. So by all means, send me that email. Folks, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. But I also want to encourage you to go to ntmedia.org, check out all that we have to offer. There's just so much going on. There's prayer and meditation, information and discussion. There's music too. You can hear the music at ntmedia.org/listen. Today, we have over 40 hours of programming each week, with more coming each and every month. Today at 12 noon Pacific time, that's 1 p.m. Mountain time, you can check out Finding the Joy in the Journey with the absolutely radiant Reverend Gina Colvario Krupka. And if you have the opportunity, by all means, go to ntmedia.org/donate. Help us bring all the goodness we can to the largest possible audience we can as we work to make this a world that works for everyone. So I look forward to seeing you again next week. And until we meet again, I trust that you will choose wisely. Much love, many blessings, and Happy New Year.
Choice, your creative superpower. We have the power to manifest as we dedicate attention to our thoughts, but often miss opportunity to achieve the greatest good. Your superpower is waiting to be unleashed to unlock a fuller, more rewarding world for all. Join us every Thursday at noon Mountain Time for Choice, your creative superpower with Zoe DeMuro.